And we'll get started here in just a minute. Want to give people, because I see more people chiming in, we'll give a couple more minutes as people join to get started. I can just go ahead and give a little bit of a welcome there. I'm Douglas Meyer with the Ocean Project. And this is, again, part of our Making Conservation Happen webinar series. And today's edition is devoted to advancing understanding of effective conservation engagement. And with that, we're really lucky to have some special guests with us. Joy Kubarek from Inform Evaluation and Research, Amy Niedbalski, I almost got it the first time, from the St. Louis Zoo, and Jackie Ogden from Zoo Advisors. And what we'll be doing is going through some of the really exciting events that are happening in the social science research agenda at AZA, and how that could apply to what's going on with efforts such as SAFE, as well as I'll put in what, if you've been tuning into these webinars, has become my usual plug for the 30 by 30, protecting 30% of our land and oceans by 2030. So with that as our agenda, I would be remiss before I started and before we really got rolling here to not acknowledge kind of the tricky times around us. I always wondered if that idea of you will live in interesting times was a blessing or a curse. It kind of seemed a little like the latter lately, but I know it's just been tough for a lot of aquariums and zoos out there. So, and a lot of people, both professionally and personally. And so I wanted to acknowledge that before kind of turning our attention to what we hope to be a much more positive topic today. Which is, again, what's going on with the social science research agenda, as well as how that can be applied to some of these really promising efforts ongoing around SAFE, as well as with 30 by 30. Now, what I'd like to do with that is just do a quick survey to help myself and our speakers understand a little bit about how you all who are on this webinar are let me just a second, one of our panelists just came in. How you all are doing in terms of the background you had, and specifically, some of this is going to be a little bit of a combination of some of the sessions that happened at AZA annual conference. So I wanted to just do this quick poll and have you guys just respond, if you would, really quickly to whether you were able to be at AZA and whether you might have attended some of the sessions that touched on the topics we're going to be doing today. Oh, great. So it looks like we have a nice mix here. And most of the folks, it looks like were unable to be at AZA for the AZA virtual annual meeting. So that's helpful to keep in mind as we go into our conversation today. So Joy and Amy, that tells us a little bit as you get started here that folks may not have been, it looks like only a couple people were at your session. So this will be fresh information for a lot of them. I'm gonna go ahead and end that poll now and pass it over to you, Joy and Amy. So thank you very much for being here.
Great. Thank you, Doug, so much for inviting us. And we're excited to continue to share more information about this new social science research agenda. So again, thank you for doing that poll. I know for those of you that were at AZA, you probably heard this maybe even multiple times. And if you weren't, then I'm so glad that we're able to share this with you today. All right, next slide. Okay, so some of you might be familiar with social science research and the concept of a research agenda, but for some of you, perhaps maybe this is a little bit new. So just wanted to share a little bit with you about the purpose of a research agenda, and specifically this research agenda. So this is really a tool to help guide individuals that want to pursue doing social science research that would help support zoos and aquariums and understanding how to better maximize their missions. So the agenda itself really helps identify questions that are recommended to explore in years to come, to really help better understand how zoos and aquariums are situated within society and within the bigger efforts around conservation work. And it's really trying to identify what are the pressing issues and trends that perhaps need to be addressed that haven't been addressed to this point. There was a previous research agenda. It was called a framework back in 2010. So that was the social science research framework for zoos and aquariums. And that framework was originally instigated by work from the Conservation Education Committee. So as you would expect, a lot of the questions were focused on education. There's been a lot of work done in the past 10 years, and there's actually been literature reviews to identify how much progress has been made from that framework. And we saw that there was many questions from that original framework that have been addressed, we feel comfortable with. We confidently can say, yes, we know this about that question. But then there were still some gaps that existed from that original framework as well. So you'll see, as I explain in a moment about the development process, part of what we did was reflect on what was accomplished and where those gaps still remaining. So again, the intent with this agenda is to help AZA members, but not just AZA members, also university researchers, graduate students, both master's and PhD level, as well as practitioners that are really interested in digging into some of these meaty questions and advancing our work. Next slide, please. So this is just a snapshot of the timeline for developing the new agenda. Though I do have to say it starts at March. Really a lot of the conversations leading up to this point started a year before this. You'll hear from Jackie Ogden later, she'll touch on this a little bit, but there's been conversations about what a conservation culture is and what does that mean for zoos and aquariums, as well as this bigger overarching question of social change and how do we drive towards that. So that's all culminated in a gathering in March earlier this year. Yes, right when the pandemic was on the verge of being an outbreak. We convened a cross-section of zoo and aquarium practitioners, researchers, academics, all in total. There were about 23 of us that got together to do this reflection and identify what those issues were that needed to be addressed. This then went through an iterative process of kind of synthesizing what came from that meeting, sharing those revised draft research questions. And then as you can see in May, we actually went through a series of surveying and conversations with a broader swath of stakeholders to get their feedback about the potential research questions. We've also shared it with some other peer organizations, so the North American Association for Environmental Education and the Children in Nature Network, to see how these questions that were being identified were situated within their efforts and some of the broader conversations around conservation. In July, these research questions were presented to the AZA Board of Directors, and thankfully, they approved them with much gusto. They actually had some great conversation around these questions and the direction that they could help lead zoos and aquariums in. And then from there on, we are presenting, we're sharing, hopefully raising some awareness around the agenda, and not just awareness, but hopefully inspiring people to take some action, to really start to use the agenda, anchor it in their work, seek proposals, seek collaborations with others, to really start to move the needle on these questions. Next slide. So drum roll, please. Da, 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 da. These are the key research questions. And I should say, these questions, so again, these went through a pretty extensive review process, and we did a lot of wordsmithing and back and forth to get them to this point. But there's also sub-questions. So these questions are sort of like the umbrella question under these different areas. And then there's multiple sub-questions for each of these that give kind of a more narrow focused lens to what we feel needs to be addressed moving forward. So you can see that first question is really more of an inward look. So looking at how zoo and aquarium operations may or may not support the building of a more equitable society. We had some really intense conversations about the norms and privileges that are inherent in zoos and aquariums, and what does this mean, not just for our field, but for how we're situated in society, how people perceive us, how we're helping or hurting these bigger, broader issues that our society is facing. And then specifically with this, and if you have been staying attuned to some of the AZA conversations lately, also looking at how the diversity, equity, access, and inclusion efforts might be able to better support some of these internal operations. The second question then kind of flips it around and takes more of an external look. So an outward look at how zoos and aquariums are situated in communities and how they work with communities. A word that came up a lot was this idea of co-creation, co-designing. So co-designing conservation efforts. And you can see with the latter part of this question, there's a particular focus on environmental and social justice, which is a rather new angle for zoos and aquariums to be pursuing through social science research. The third question is actually what will be a deeper dive with Jackie in just a little bit, so I won't go too much into that. But really it's this, again, this idea of how zoos and aquariums are contributing to social change towards conservation. The fourth question is probably the most reminiscent of the original framework from 2010. So looking at the role of zoos and aquariums and contributing to the development of really the whole person. So this has a lot of those education undertones, but also looking at physical well-being and social emotional well-being. And Amy Niedbalski is joining us in just a minute here to join in on sharing what's next with this agenda, but she's done some great work looking at kind of health metrics around the zoo or aquarium visitor experience. So that's just an example of where that question could be directed. And the last question is really looking at more of a holistic approach to conservation, looking at the human dimension in addition to the animal dimension. Next slide. So the agenda itself is more than these 5 questions. So that's why we've put out here the table of contents. So you understand that this really is a deeper document that goes beyond just those questions. So obviously it shares more of the purpose, the background, just like what I'm going over today, but in more detail, as well as the process and timeline for developing this. I'm here sharing this, representing this work because I helped facilitate the process, but it really truly was an effort that was supported by many. Like I said, that first convening had 23 people contributing just to that first phase of this work. But then also in the agenda document, so it has the key research questions, but also has more context and background. So I just gave you a little snippet of kind of the bigger context of the questions, but the agenda document itself goes into much, much more detail, including some references to other research that has been done that supports this direction. The other thing I want to draw your attention to is the action plan, something that we heard both anecdotally as well as through some more systematic review of the previous agenda from 2010 is that it didn't get a lot of traction. So some people were aware of it, some people used it, but by and large, it was missing the action that we hope to see with this new agenda. So there is an action plan with recommended strategies for actually making this work happen. We don't have time to go into the detail of that right now, but I highly recommend that you check out the agenda on the AZA website and look at that action plan. And I hope that you can identify a place where you might fit in there as well. And then the last part of the agenda is those sub-questions. So a pretty long list of sub-questions that again provide a little bit more context, a little more focus. Next slide. And I will let Amy Niedbalski share a little bit about what the plan is moving forward.
Sure. Can you see me and hear me okay? Fabulous. I had full internet outage at my house while kids are online learning and my husband and I are online working. So I'm outside on my phone on my cell. So bear with me, please. And I so apologize, Doug. Again, my name is Amy Niedbalski. I'm the Director of Conservation Audience Research and Evaluation at the St. Louis Zoo. I am part of a leadership group who have developed this social science research and evaluation scientific advisory group as part of the AZA. So at the same time we were developing that group, again, a very new group, the social science research agenda was also being created. And so lots of people working on both of these things together, and the timing and was just fortuitous for synergy and collaboration to occur. So we're really excited. So I am chair currently of the scientific advisory group. Kathy and Khalil at Oregon Zoo and Marley Steele and Emma at Denver Zoo are also on the leadership team of this group. And so we have been working with Joy and her team for months now, really trying to understand how the scientific advisory group can incorporate the social science research agenda into our plan, our action plan, as we're writing our action plan as a new SAG. So we have had a lot of meetings, and we are still figuring out exactly what we're going to do, but our primary responsibilities are to champion this work. Also, secondly, is to track this work. So how we're doing that, we haven't had a meeting since AZA yet, since so we did talk yesterday, just the leadership group, and we're really trying to figure out the best way outside of zoos and aquariums to track this work. So if anyone has any ideas, feel free to reach out to me outside of, just having an external form that people fill out just so we can track it. But also what we really want to do is be able to help create connections. So as we find out different universities, different institutions, zoos, aquariums, whoever are doing work that apply to this research agenda, that we can help be the connectors. So we really want to be able to create a platform that allows these connections to happen, whether that be through webinars, whatever kind of meetings. Hopefully one day again we'll be in person. We will be working towards creating those avenues for connection, for communication, and tracking this work. So thank you for letting me speak. I'm going to go ahead and move to the next slide. There was a few really great tips here about supporting the agenda. So share it. If anyone is on here that has colleagues that aren't aware of it, that it would apply to, please share. Collaborate with others, talk to others. What would be really great is to get everyone on the Social Science Research and Evaluation Scientific Advisory Group within the AZA network. Anyone can join that. You don't have to be an AZA member. So feel free to jump on there, and you will have access to resources through the SAG, to conversation, to expertise. You can ask questions, and also chat with others. But please, yes, reference in your studies, integrate into funding proposals, mention this research agenda in conversation is the big thing. Tell others and really just join our conversation.
If you want to go to the next slide, Doug. So we must give many thanks to the National Science Foundation. They actually helped support the third wave of the WAZAM, Why Zoos and Aquariums Matter study, which subsequently helped support the development of this agenda. So, which again, I think just helps validate how important this work is. So it is supported by folks that believe that this is important for our industry moving forward. And I did put in the chat before I wrap up here and turn it back over, I put a link to the research agenda itself, which is found on the AZA website underneath the Research and Technology Committee page. And I also wrote the name of the scientific advisory group that Amy was referring to, so you can easily find that and join later. And that's it from us. So I'll turn it back to Doug.
Oh, thank you both so much. That's really great to see this moving forward for all of us who've been working on these issues to kind of have a common agenda to how to shape the research. And I know before we turn it over to Jackie Ogden here to talk a little bit about the application, and Joy, you mentioned really taking this research and putting it into action. I'd love to do a quick poll, initial quick response from those on the line about their response to this agenda. So I will go ahead and put this forward again. Just a quick reaction from folks to help Jackie and folks understand. We have some intrigued people. All right. So it looks like we have a lot of folks who are intrigued by what's going on, and maybe Jackie, with that, let me turn it over to you to talk about how to maybe put some of what Joy and Amy were talking about into practice. So with that, I'll go to the next slide and pull it up to you, Jackie.
Great, thank you very much. So it's really wonderful to be with you all this morning. Apologies. Oh, so first who I am. So I'm Jackie Ogden, I currently am working with zoo advisors as well as doing some work directly with the AZA on safe and social change and conservation culture and all sorts of fun stuff. My background is in the zoological world, about 33, 34 years, worked at Zoo Atlanta, at San Diego Zoo, and then most recently with Disney, and I retired from Disney about 6 years ago, and I'm now sort of partially retired and getting to do really, really fun stuff, and working with a number of you in the community on this. So really, really great. I am, what I'm very excited to talk with you about today are, as both Joy and Doug and Amy referenced, in one effort that we are engaged in, that really with the intent of really bringing to life part of the research agenda. And I should say this work has been sort of been being developed on parallel paths. And next slide, Doug, or somebody. Thank you. I think everybody that is on this call, I'm sure, is more than aware that for the last couple of decades, we really have been making big strides in how it is that we really improve our ability to engage our public in conservation, and really to not only get them engaged, get them to act on behalf of conservation, and then perhaps in the long term even really be part of major efforts related to social change. And certainly, that's what the Ocean Project is all about, and we know that, and it's one of the many things I've always admired about the Ocean Project. What I think, though, that everybody here would agree is that when you think about the millions of people that we reach, hundreds of millions of people that we reach through our zoos and aquariums, certainly in person, especially in the past, but increasingly again, but then also really from a virtual perspective, we reach a number, so many people, but we haven't really realized the power inherent in that. And I think probably for many of the people on this call, this is one of the things, at least for me, that gets me up in the morning, is the notion of, my God, how can we really do that? And so there's been a lot of effort over the past period of time to really move that forward. But we know that, particularly when you look at all of the different audiences that are out there, that we're not there yet. And so we really want to be able to move this forward, even if it were not for this time, we would want to move this forward, of course. But we also really want to use this as a way to help our members get more engaged in work, in mission-related work. And we know this is a horribly crazy time. And we also know that it's really helpful to be part of something that has purpose and meaning during times like this. So we want people to be engaged in mission-related work, but we also want to help them do it in a way that's as efficient as possible, because we know how strapped everybody is. We also know that there are a ton of people initiatives out there, whether it be related to social change, whether it be to community engagement, to social equity, social and environmental justice, and we want to help people integrate all of those things. And then Joy also talked a bit about the increasing focus on co-design, co-creation, and so we see this as an opportunity to really model that and try to do it really effectively. So next slide. So our goal really is to use a co-design approach to work with the community to develop an approach that will help us to deliver on what really was the original promise of saving animals and people from extinction, related to public engagement and social change. And so you all are probably quite familiar with co-design, but sort of basically what we mean by it is that it's really the community doing the work with the community. And certainly the intent obviously is that I think probably we all know that we get better products when there are more minds involved, and you not only get that, but you also get more buy-in, which then ultimately, hopefully makes us all more successful. What it isn't is just gathering some thoughts from people, going away into some sort of a black box and coming out with with a new thing that we want people to do that, that we expect people to buy into. So it really is intended to be a very engaged, inclusive effort. So we are working right now in developing what the approach that we're going to take to that. We have put together a development group that includes a cross-section of AZA members. At the annual conference, we did engage a number of committees and scientific advisory groups, sharing this concept with them. And then we're now in the process of determining, again, how do we not only keep people engaged, but add people to the equation and to the process. And obviously, that's a big part of talking with you all, because we know that you are clear partners and allies in this area. So next slide. So what we are really looking to do is, when Joy referenced the conservation culture work, and a couple of years ago, the AZA approved a one-year task force to really focus on helping our members to bring the conservation aspects of their mission to life. And that was actually related to SAFE as well. SAFE has a metric associated with it that, you know, is about having our members become really to really strengthen the conservation missions of our members, and help all of our members feel like conservation is their goal. And so as part of that effort, we did a logic model that Joy was very instrumental in, actually, in helping do, along with Vicki Searles and others. And it aims towards two major long-term outcomes. First, that people and wildlife thrive together, and second, that zoos and aquariums are synonymous with conservation. So when we started laying out this work of helping us reach the potential of SAFE related to social change and public engagement, we looked at those outcomes and went, okay, so how can this work help contribute to that? And from a sort of a medium-term perspective, over the next 2 to 10 years, our hope would be that at the end of this period, our members, working with their partners, will have really done successfully integrated the human dimension into conservation work, into both how we do conservation, meaning that, you know, that when conservation work is being done, it is co-designed with whatever the relevant communities are, but that also we've really figured out how to engage the public meaningfully in conservation. And again, you all are certainly one of the great examples there. We hope certainly that our members have made mission progress during this crazy period and into the new tomorrow, and also, of course, that we build capacity. And then in the short term, our hope is that we will have co-designed an approach that we have figured out as part of that ways for our members to be engaged in helping people helping people act on behalf of wildlife and be part of the solution for issues with wildlife and people thriving together. That we hope that we will have helped people really integrate broad messages into their communication efforts. Again, something I know that the Ocean Project has been all about. And although we don't have any illusions that we will have reached big outcomes over 1 to 2 years, we do anticipate that we will have outputs that we can reference. Next slide. And so we do know that there are great examples of where we have seen brilliance here, certainly from a SAFE perspective, also dealing with individual species, but then also when we look at things that cut across species, whether that is working with pollinators, working through threats to wildlife like wildlife trafficking, or of course the work that you all have done. Next slide. And so we are just beginning this effort, but as we go forward, we do have some guiding principles that are in place to ensure that we're successful. First, of course, is to make sure that we are amplifying mission impact. Obviously, that we are strengthening the integration of people into our conservation solutions. that we have figured out how to do a co-design process, hopefully successfully, which I'm sure still will be messy in our world. And then also figuring out how to do this in a way that where it's really integrated into what people are already doing, rather than just adding whole bunches of new stuff for people to do. And I believe last slide. And so, this is obviously where you all live. This is the kind of work that the Ocean Project does and people that support it do. And so, we really want to know how this resonates with you, and how what we're talking about here can actually help you do what you're already doing. And so our promise is, as we develop our co-design approach, that we will provide regular updates to all the folks that we're talking to, and really share a way for you all to be involved. And so what we really want, and I realize there's no time to do that today, but we really would like, as we go forward, to get your feedback, and don't know if you all would be open to having some sort of a point person from the Ocean Project in your group to really work with us closely, but just interested in setting up some mechanism to be sure that you all are part of this effort. So, and I think that is it. And I believe, unfortunately, we're out of time. So Doug, turning it to you.
Sure, thank you, Jackie. And let me turn on my video here. I don't know if we're going to have time for Q&A today. If some of our panelists can stay on a little bit, maybe we can answer any questions that have come up. I just wanted to put in that plug I alluded to at the beginning of the webinar. One of the ways, as Jackie talked about, we're looking for ways the audiences that we reach can be part of the solution going forward. And one of those is with the Ocean Project is hoping to and looking forward to working going forward on as part of the 30 by 30 campaign. That's one way. And so in keeping with Jackie's call there, we have appropriately at this point 30 different aquariums and zoos and are working with AZA on this that have signed up with interest. If you are interested in, as we go forward, right now we're just kind of gathering names and interest in being part of the 30 by 30 campaign, which we will be looking to monitor and evaluate in keeping with that research agenda you just heard about. So please drop your name and email into the chat of this webinar and we'll get back to you. So let me actually ask quickly for Amy and for our panelists if they have any time to stay a couple minutes in case we have a couple of questions. And thank you, Jackie, for putting your email in the chat if people have any questions to follow up directly with you.
Yeah, I can stay on for a few if there's any questions.
I can stay on as well.
For me.
Okay, great. Well, let me give we'll give a second for people to step off, and then we have a couple of, okay, great. We have a couple people putting in some information as to wanting to be part of our list going forward, and we will definitely be sharing that. One of the things we're looking to do is connect dots. And let me actually ask that question to Joy and Amy is to how do you see the research agenda applying? Have you thought about how that applies specifically to SAFE? Or can you give a couple examples of maybe how you see those dots being connected for folks?
Mm-hmm. I think the last research question was about that systemic approach to conservation, and part of the SAFE program is to have not only plans and metrics against actually making an impact on these species, but also having a public engagement component of it. And I think I don't think I'd be remiss in saying that a lot of people have recognized that the public engagement component of the SAFE effort perhaps hasn't been fully realized. There's been efforts, it's part of the plans, but I think giving it more attention, really trying to make it robust and understanding more of what we mean by public engagement. And again, bringing it back to that second research question of co-creating, co-designing those efforts with communities rather than just making it an outreach effort. So I think it touches on a couple of the questions there.
So I honestly have not been terribly involved in the SAFE initiative. So I have not thought about all of the ways that they could interact together until we've started talking about it this week for this webinar. So it's so exciting. But in my world and in my role, I am so thrilled as I've realized so much in the past year or two how much that community engagement and that co-design process is important. I presented about this at AZA a few weeks ago, and I'm thrilled that that is known and being incorporated into the agenda and into hearts and minds and souls throughout the AZA and member institutions.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, one of the things that I'll add that with a shout out here to a few of the aquariums that worked with us on the Heartwired to Love the Ocean project is we learned that it's really effective to start with an AZA safe species and then pull back into some other issues. And I don't know how you all have seen that apply as well, but that's definitely something we're looking at 30 by 30. And there was a great suggestion, I think from one of the folks on the webinar today, to really maybe connect the three groups, the safe interest group, the research interest group, and what we're doing with 30 by 30, and really look for those opportunities. So if you all are on board, I think that's a good next step out of this webinar.
Yeah,
That's excellent. And I hate to do this, but I need to run. I just found out, I just learned that my internet connection is unstable. Always a frightening thing. So it was just such a pleasure to be here. And thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Jackie. And I think, again, at this point, if there's anyone else who has a final question, we'll put out that call one more time. Thank you to our panelists for putting their email addresses in there. I would encourage you to reach out to them directly. A couple of you have had requests for slides from this. The webinars are recorded, so you can always direct friends and family back to this there, or if you're interested in actually getting the individual slides, please contact our presenters directly. With that, again, we will be back in touch. Look for an announcement of the next Friday webinar. It will be, again, Truth in Advertising, first Friday of the month. So I don't actually know what Friday that is, but I know it's somewhere around election time. So anyway, hope everybody has a good afternoon or late morning if you're on the West Coast. And thanks again for joining us. Thanks especially to our panelists, and we'll look forward to being in touch and keeping the ball rolling. Thanks, everybody.
thanks.
Thank you.